Here's something that should not make sense. The American economy grew by 2.1% in 2025. Corporate profits are up. The stock market, despite some turbulence, is still near record highs. The government keeps saying things are fine, and yet nearly 1.2 million Americans lost their jobs in 2025 alone. That's the highest number of job cuts since the Great Recession outside of COVID. Amazon cut 14,000 people, Intel 25,000, Microsoft 15,000, and the federal government, under DOGE, over 290,000 public sector jobs were eliminated. So let me ask you a very simple question. How can an economy be growing while jobs are disappearing? That's not a rhetorical question. That's one of the most important economic puzzles of our time. And today I'm going to explain exactly what's happening, Iger, because the answer is going to tell you a lot about where America and your career is heading. Stay with me, because this gets weird. Let's start with the raw numbers, because they are genuinely strange. In 2025, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis confirmed that real GDP grew by 2.1% for the full year. Consumer spending held up. Investment in technology surged. On paper, the economy is functioning. But here's what the GDP number hides. Job growth in 2025 averaged just 15,000 new jobs per month. To put that in context, the U.S. economy normally needs to add around 150,000 to 200,000 jobs per month just to keep up with population growth. 15,000 is not a rounding error. It's a near flat line. And the revisions made things look even worse. The Bureau of Labor Statistics revised the total number of jobs added in 2025 from 584,000 all the way down to just 181,000 for the entire year. That's a massive downward correction, and a sign that the headline numbers were misleading millions of Americans about the health of the labor market. At the same time, job openings fell to 6.5 million at the end of 2025, the lowest level since 2020. And according to Business Roundtable, more CEOs plan to reduce employment than increase it for 3 consecutive quarters in a row, the worst reading since the Great Recession. So the economy is growing, but almost no one is getting hired. Economists have a name for this. They call it jobless growth. And it's not just a temporary blip. Goldman Sachs economists are now openly saying it could be the new normal. But why? What is actually driving this disconnect? There are 3 forces at work, and each one is reshaping the economy in ways most people don't fully understand. The first force is artificial intelligence, and this one is the most misunderstood. You've heard the headline, AI is replacing jobs, but the real story is more nuanced than that, and it actually explains a huge part of why GDP can grow while payrolls stagnate. Here's the core idea: productivity. Productivity means how much output do you get per worker per hour? If a company can produce the same amount of goods or services with fewer people, GDP stays the same or grows, but employment falls. And that is exactly what is happening right now. In Q3 of 2025, real GDP grew at a remarkable 4.4% annualized rate. But here's the breakdown that most news channels ignored. Productivity surged 4.9%, while hours worked increased by just 0.5%. In other words, output exploded, but labor barely moved. The economy grew not because more people worked, but because the same people and increasingly machines got more done. Investment in IT equipment, primarily AI infrastructure, represented 70% of total U.S. investment in the first half of 2025 and accounted for nearly half of real GDP growth. Let that number sink in. If you strip out AI-related tech investment, the U.S. economy would have been close to stagnation. Goldman Sachs found that companies discussing AI in the context of their workforce reduced their job openings by 12% over the past year, steeper than the 8% reduction seen across all companies. And in specific functions like customer support and software development, AI-driven productivity gains are running at around 30%. PwC's Global AI Jobs Barometer, which analyzed close to 1 billion job advertisements from 6 continents, found that industries most exposed to AI are seeing revenue per employee grow 3 times faster than industries least exposed to AI. But here's the twist, and this is important. Goldman Sachs also found that AI contributed, in their words, basically zero to broad GDP growth in 2025 at the macro level. The productivity gains are real, but they're concentrated in a handful of companies and sectors that have actually implemented AI well. The rest of the economy hasn't caught up yet. Goldman's own economists project that AI won't have a measurable economy-wide impact until 2027 or later. So we're in this bizarre middle phase. AI is real enough to suppress hiring, but it's not yet widespread enough to create the massive productivity boom that economists promise is coming. We're stuck between two worlds, and the people paying the price are job seekers. Jerome Powell himself, the chair of the Federal Reserve, noted something remarkable. Young people, minorities, and recent graduates are having a hard time finding jobs even while the official unemployment rate looks stable. Entry-level positions are disappearing fastest because those are precisely the roles AI can most easily automate. The second force reshaping this economy is political, since it happened faster than almost anyone expected. In early 2025, the Trump administration launched DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and initiated what became the largest single reduction in U.S. government employment in modern history. Over 290,000 public sector positions were eliminated through direct layoffs, buyouts, and agency restructuring. When you include contractors, grant recipients, nonprofits, universities, and hospitals that depend on federal funding, economists estimated that DOGE-related activities could ultimately affect close to 1 million jobs throughout the broader economy. Think about that chain reaction. A federal agency cuts funding to a university research program. The university lays off 50 researchers. A local coffee shop near campus loses a third of its customers. The coffee shop reduces staff. None of those downstream job losses show up as DOGE cuts in the headlines, but they're all connected. Now here's the economic paradox. Cutting government spending reduces the numerator that goes into GDP. Government spending is literally one of the 4 components of GDP. And yet, in theory, DOGE was supposed to make the private sector more efficient by reducing bureaucratic drag. Did it work? The verdict is mixed. Government spending and investment contracted by 5.8% in Q4 2025, subtracting over a full percentage point from GDP growth that quarter. The economy slowed, but it didn't collapse because private sector investment, particularly in tech and AI, partially compensated. The bigger problem is timing. Job losses from DOGE happened immediately. The efficiency gains, if they materialize at all, will take years to show up in private sector growth. In the meantime, hundreds of thousands of Americans lost paychecks while the GDP headline stayed positive. The third force is trade policy, and this one is a slow-motion time bomb. Trump's tariffs were sold to the American public as a way to bring jobs back and protect domestic industry. And politically, that's a very compelling message. Economically, the picture is a lot more complicated. Here's the basic mechanism. Tariffs raise the cost of imported goods. American companies that rely on imported components, and that's most of manufacturing, retail, and agriculture, face higher input costs. Higher costs squeeze profit margins. Squeezed profit margins mean fewer new hires and faster automation. Exports told their own story. They declined at a rate of 3.3% in Q4 2025, the largest contraction since Q2 2023, as trading partners retaliated and global demand for U.S. goods softened. Some economists have compared the current tariff environment to the 1973 oil crisis, a supply shock that simultaneously raised prices and unemployment, creating the stagflation nightmare that haunted the U.S. for a decade. The retail and services sectors, which employ more Americans than any other industry, are the most exposed to tariff-driven cost increases because they depend heavily on consumer spending. Every major sector faces the possibility of significant layoffs in 2026. Unemployment is climbing. Job growth is decelerating, wage growth has slowed, and unlike the post-COVID recovery, There's no obvious stimulus waiting in the wings this time. So let's bring this together, because this isn't just a macroeconomic story, it's a story about what's happening to the American middle class in real time. The US economy is growing, yeah, but the growth is being captured by a relatively small number of large, tech-intensive companies that have figured out how to generate more revenue per employee using AI and automation. Meanwhile, the workers displaced by these changes, especially in government, retail, technology, and entry-level white-collar roles, are not finding new opportunities at the same pace. Goldman Sachs economists put it plainly. The modest job growth alongside robust GDP growth seen recently is likely to be normal to some degree in the years ahead. In other words, get used to it. This is the defining economic tension of the 2020s. GDP measures the total size of the economic pie, but it doesn't tell you who's eating it. When a company replaces 100 customer service representatives with an AI chatbot, productivity goes up, output stays the same. Costs fall, profit margins expand, GDP is essentially unchanged. But 100 families just lost their income. That's not a failure of GDP as a concept. GDP was never designed to measure well-being or distribution, but it does explain why millions of Americans feel like the economy isn't working for them even when economists say it's growing just fine. The labor market's great freeze means companies aren't mass firing, but they're also barely hiring. For anyone currently employed, that looks like stability. For anyone trying to enter the workforce, get a promotion, or switch careers, it feels like running into a wall. So what happens next? 3 scenarios are being discussed by serious economists right now. Scenario 1, the productivity boom arrives. AI investment, which is already reshaping specific sectors, eventually diffuses across the entire economy. Productivity rises broadly. New industries emerge, just as electrification and the internet eventually created more jobs than they destroyed. In this scenario, the current pain is transitional. Scenario 2, jobless growth becomes permanent. AI raises productivity, but the gains go entirely to capital owners, shareholders, tech firms, wealthy investors rather than workers. GDP keeps growing, inequality deepens. The political and social consequences of this scenario are severe, and we're already beginning to see them. Scenario 3, something breaks. Goldman Sachs raised its recession probability to 45%. Tariffs continue to squeeze consumer spending. The AI investment bubble deflates. Layoffs accelerate. The great freeze becomes a great unfreeze in the wrong direction. Here's the honest answer. Nobody knows which of these plays out. But the weird paradox we started with, a growing economy and a disappearing job market, is not going away. And understanding why it's happening is the first step to navigating it. Because the people who understand the rules of the new economy will be the ones who adapt. And the ones who are still waiting for the old rules to come back are going to be waiting a very long time. If this video helped you make sense of what's happening out there, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of content I'm making every week here at Cash Lab. And drop a comment. Do you think the AI productivity boom is real, or is it mostly hype? I want to know what you think. See you in the next one.